We were told at the beginning that we would fly 50 missions and go home. So when my crew got up to 45, they decided it should be 52. And they admitted later that their plan, if they didn't have too much trouble with the flying crews, they would make it 55. Well, it was a big morale problem. And after I made 52, my crew made 52, they put it back to 50. So there are very few crews that hit 52.
But yours was one of them.
Yes, and after 52, we sat on the field for a couple of days till they sent us to a replacement depot, which is commonly called a repple depple, and that was near Naples. And we waited there until they had a convoy of ships loading to go back to the States. And we came back on a troop ship, one of the Kaiser ships, which were built by the hunters and built very quickly, but they were a good serviceable ship. And I had the bunk 6 high. I wasn't going to be in a lower bunk and have somebody get sick above me. So I made sure I got the top bunk. And we had smoke screen some nights because they detected submarines in the area. But we got home safe.
What was your?
Now,
do you remember your very first mission once you arrived? Where your missions took off from Tunisia?
no, we flew from Tunisia to an air base in Italy.
In Italy.
And that's
where
all of our missions were from.
Were from. Do you remember your very first one?
Golly, no.
No.
Wasn't there a devastating Palm Sunday one?
Maybe.
Something on a Palm Sunday.
Some of your planes didn't come back.
Well, that happened.
Yeah,
Tell-
I know,
tell
but
about
I remember
that.
you telling a story about it.
Well, I don't remember it now.
Okay.
A lot of these things are fading.
Mm-hmm.
The one where my hat got shot out of my hand.
That's the one we want to hear.
One of the most important days of my life. I can't tell you what the date was or where it was. It was just somewhere over Nazi-occupied Europe. And anti-aircraft shells started to burst around us. So I took this off of my head with my right hand and I reached behind me on the desk for my steel helmet. And right here, this flew out of my hand, about 8 inches in front of my nose. My hand didn't get hit, my face didn't get hit. But when I picked the hat up from the floor, you see what I found. Very well ripped. My first lieutenant bar was here. I never found that.
Turn it over, it's correct.
I found a couple pieces of shrapnel, but I'm sure they weren't the ones that hit the hat because I found the shrapnel, one on the desk and one on the floor. But the hat was here, considerably higher than the floor, and I think the piece that hit it went straight on out the other side of the airplane. I continued to wear it until my squadron commander told me to get rid of it. I could have turned it in for a new one, but
That's a souvenir.
I put it in my foot locker, and from then on I didn't have a flight cap. So that's about all there is to say about that mission. It is, of course, my most important memento of my war years. Now, I told you about the day we ran out of gas. That was one of our very early missions. We later, I don't remember what our mission was, where, but again, we were at 20,000 feet or more, and we took a bad hit that knocked out our system, hydraulic system, and therefore we couldn't use the flaps. He had no brakes, and even the landing gear is cranked down hydraulically, but there is a provision for hand cranking. And it took 2 men, a half hour maybe, to crank the gear down. But hey, we had plenty of time. We were still a couple hours from our home base. And when we got home, Harry called the tower, told him it had no hydraulics, no flaps, no brakes. Now, without flaps, which allow you to fly slower, he had to land at 160 miles an hour instead of 120, with only 3,500 feet to stop, with no brakes. So the tower said, "Don't land on the runway." Of course, we knew what that meant. If we did land on the runway and if we piled up, 20 more airplanes behind us couldn't get in. So they told him to land on the plowed up stony ground beside the runway and drag your tail until you're going too slow to drag it. And dragging the belly of the airplane on the ground was our only braking capacity. And we tore up the underside of the airplane. It took 30 days to repair it. And it wasn't our airplane. Ours was having a motor put on it. And another crew had had a couple of bad days and needed some rest, and they gave us their airplane. Well, that crew, until the day we left the base to come home, that crew always blamed my pilot for smashing up their airplane. No, Jerry did it. Harry didn't do it. The Germans did it. That's the only flight we made with a borrowed airplane. We always had our own. The very one we took across from Florida. Now, on that landing, Harry needed the flight engineer up front with him. So I got the rest of the crew in the what we called the waist, which is behind the bomb bay, and I had them sit down in ditching position. One man sat down with his back and shoulders against the bulkhead and draw his knees up, get his feet close to his rear end and his knees up. Then another man, and he'd hold his hands, lock his fingers behind his head. And then another man sat down in front of him and leaned against his shins and locked his fingers behind his head to prevent a whiplash. Then, and I had 2 rows. I had 3 men here and 3 men here sitting that way. So then I had my headphones on, and when Harry said we're about to hit, I sat down in front of the first man and leaned against his shins till we landed. Then you always expect fire. It didn't happen, but you don't wait to find out. You get out as quickly as possible and get a fair distance away, then you wait. And I jumped out a window about 7 feet off the ground, landed hard on my heels, and that's when I believe I hurt my spine, which is why I'm in a wheelchair now. Hard on my heels, the jolt just went up from one vertebrae to the next. My family doctor later said, "You didn't fall down?" I said, "No." He said, "If you'd fallen down, you might have broken an arm. But your spine took all the jolt." So, there's no way to prove it now. Shortly after that day, I started to have fleeting pains in the knee, but it disappeared as fast as it came, and I didn't attach anything to it. Till after I was out of the service, eventually the knee pain got to be pretty severe, and I saw that same leg getting thin. That's when I went to the doctor and eventually had spinal surgery. And there was no neurosurgeon in Norristown at the time. I went to Philadelphia, Jefferson Hospital, and later, a man who grew up in Bridgeport was a neurosurgeon and professor at Temple. He came to Norristown to start a practice, and he did a similar operation on my sister Jenny as I had done in Philadelphia. And I got to know him pretty well because he was a Bridgeport man, and my 3 editors all knew him personally. And Jenny's husband knew him very well. So one day he and I arrived at Sacred Heart Hospital at the same time, parked side by side. I was going in to take a picture of something.
Tell them what you did. Explain what you did after you got out of the service, Uncle Bob. What was your job? Because you're talking about your editors, and our listeners don't know.
When I got out of the service, I drove a taxi part-time for a couple of years. Then I got a job as a news photographer with the Norristown Times-Herald, and I worked there 35 years. And as I said, when I met this surgeon, we walked into the hospital. My purpose there was to take a picture. But he said, "Bob, how long ago was your surgery?" I don't know now, but I probably told him 20 years. He said, "I see how well you get around, but I must tell you you're lucky." I said, "Why?" He said, "It does not come with a lifetime guarantee." And I said, "What does?"